Australia's just announced it's expelling Iran's ambassador because of Tehran's involvement in two anti-Semitic attacks. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the ambassador will have a week to leave the country. He says Iran's role in funding and directing attacks on Australia's Jewish community is unacceptable.
It was behind the attacks on the Lewis Continental Kitchen in Sydney on October 20 last year, and the Adass Israel Synagogue in Melbourne on December 6 last year. ASIO assesses it is likely Iran directed further attacks as well. These were extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression orchestrated by a foreign nation on Australian soil. They were attempts to undermine social cohesion and sow discord in our community.
Now, Mark Kenny is the director of the Australian Studies Institute at the Australian National University. He joins us now from Canberra. Mark, apparently this is the first time Australia's expelled a diplomat since the end of the Second World War. How significant a move then is this?
I think it's a fairly significant move. It doesn't have any major implications commercially for Australia, but it is a very significant move because Australia had maintained continuous diplomatic relations with Tehran right through a period when many Western nations, including the US, had ceased it. And it's not an action the government takes lightly. And I think it wants it to be seen that way, that this is a very serious suggestion that's been made, allegation by the government, and that it's taking very firm action in relation to it.
There has been criticism from Israel's government, particularly that Australia seems to have an anti-Semitism problem since October the 7th. Is that a fair assessment? Has the government not tackled anti-Semitism?
Well, I think the government's tackled anti-Semitism and been very strong in condemning anti-Semitism, but there is no doubt a strain of anti-Semitism in the community, in some elements of the community. That's the case across many nations. But the real issue, I think, for the government, the pressure that's come on the government, has been from Israel and from the Jewish lobby in Australia, which has really ramped this up. And it's tried to use that allegation of being soft on anti-Semitism to bolster its argument that the Australian government is too pro-Palestinian in its position. Of course, we know the Australian government has recently declared that it plans to recognise a state of Palestine at the United Nations General Assembly in September. This has caused some degree of outrage and some pretty heated sort of comments from Bibi Netanyahu in relation to Anthony Albanese personally, calling him weak and so forth. So I suspect there's an element of Australia wanting to appear very tough and forthright here, which is not to underplay the significance of this intelligence finding that's been given to the government by its chief agency. It's taking it seriously, and we see that action today.
Yeah, Mark, so that decision by Australia to join France and the UK in recognising a Palestinian state, does that, as you sort of hinted there, mean the Australian government feels under more pressure, particularly from the Israel lobby, to seem to be hard to be cracking down on any perceived anti-Semitism?
Well, I think that's right, Bernard. I think that there's been quite a lot of pressure, and it hasn't even been subtle. Bibi Netanyahu has done an interview with Australian media, with a very kind of cooperative media, I might just say, in Australia, wherein he has branded Anthony Albanese as weak and the government as essentially rewarding Hamas for for the October 7 attacks, and these kinds of this kind of rhetoric has put pressure on the government here because, of course, there is a strong Jewish community in Australia. Not all of it is pro-Israel, or at least pro-Netanyahu, but there is definitely political pressure being applied, and it's of course used by the opposition in Parliament as well. So I think there's an element here of the government wanting to appear very strong and decisive, but I wouldn't also want to underplay the significance of this. If that intelligence is right, then the fact of a state actor orchestrating what are effectively terrorist attacks in Australia is a very serious matter, and any government is going to respond forthrightly to that.
So just lastly then, on that decision to legislate the IRGC as a terrorist organisation, how will that affect how Australia prosecutes its crackdown on the Iranians' activities in Australia?
Well, I guess it means that ASIO, the principal domestic security agency, is very much enmeshed in this. Has been on the case, and nominating this body as a terrorist organisation just makes it. It brings it up the priority list and makes it more front of mind. I'm not sure that it's going to have, in material terms, any particular effect on the ground, save for the fact that expelling the diplomats and effectively truncating relations between the two countries would make it much harder for Iranian actors to undertake any sort of activity without being detected.
OK, Mark Kenny from the Australian National University in Canberra, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.